glad you're watching KTN, your bold and authoritative channel. Today is the 3rd of May 2013, and it also happens to be World Press Freedom Day. Knowing that it's World Press Freedom Day, a lot of attention is being placed on the protection of journalists as well as online safety. And over the years, we have seen what has happened. Traditional media is now trying to cope with online presence, or what we call the new social media platforms. And in this case, we are talking about Facebook, we're talking about Twitter, we're talking about Flickr, we're talking about YouTube, and all the other various social media platforms that are available that, of course, the mainstream media cannot run away from. But importantly, we're also here to officially pay witness to the launching of the European Union Twitter handle, and that is right here at the European Union headquarters. And joining me is the ambassador of the European Union, that is Ambassador Ludovic Briet, who is here to tell us more about why we've decided to finally have a Twitter handle launched. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Joy. It's a pleasure. And
yes.
Thank you for being there.
Well, we are so honored. Well, the first question would actually be, why launch a Twitter handle?
Why do we launch today at EU in Kenya? The reason is that it is time for us to come to the present and stop living in the past and look at the future. So we really want to expand our presence on social media. Also, we want to enhance the understanding of what the European Union is doing in Kenya, because we are quite comprehensively engaged here. And Twitter is a useful medium for us to pass messages pretty much in real time.
Well, one would actually wonder, why has it taken so long for the European Union to get onto these social media platforms, knowing that Kenyans are very active when it comes to social media?
Fair question. I think there has been some lethargy, but that is largely to give an excuse to the fact that we've been otherwise engaged. We've been quite busy actually over the past years, and particularly the past couple of months, in trying to partner with Kenya and look forward towards the shape of our future partnership.
Great. And if we're going to look at the Twitter handle, maybe you just want to enlighten us on what the Twitter handle is going to be called, and who is going to be the specific target audience that we're looking at here online.
Thank you. It is called at EU in Kenya, and the specific target audience are Kenyans. Beyond the Kenyans, obviously, people of the region who are present, and we want to use it to also inform people more on what's happening in Brussels, which for many is a mystery, for some of us still after many years.
Well, mystery, you may call it. At EU in Kenya, that is the Twitter handle that we are going to, from today onwards, be very actively looking forward to hearing from. And just enlighten us, who exactly is going to be handling or doing the administration of this Twitter handle?
Two persons in particular. One person more focusing on his journalistic experience, Matt Freer, and secondly, Christophe de Vroey, who is more focusing on bringing together the whole EU knowledge base.
Okay, and in this case, we're going to be looking at what subjects are being put out there to the audiences in tandem, that are in tandem with the European Union programs.
That's right, yes.
Okay, could you just highlight some of the programs that the European Union has had to bring into Kenya since it was it first set presence in Kenya, that is way back in 1973. Just take us through some of the programs that the European Union has.
Maybe I should start with the fact that we've been very present, and for many years, in terms of the provision of humanitarian aid and emergency assistance. Coupled with that, and linking the relief and rehabilitation to that emergency assistance, is our development assistance. That is traditionally why we have been present in many, if not all, African countries. Same goes for Kenya, same goes for the region. We have added to that over the past years a greater presence in the security sphere. Our anti-piracy effort is important, mostly contribution from the EU member states. We have 20 EU member states present here in Kenya, out of a total of 27. And by July the 1st, 28, Croatia joining. And that gives us quite a solid present. So the EU at 27 has been a very major player and major partner in that humanitarian, in the developmental sphere, but also in terms of our political presence. For example, in the last elections, we did a lot to support the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, to support the elections. And we are really congratulating Kenyans for having conducted peaceful elections in the first place.
Well, let me just ask a question. How would you actually define the democracy levels in Kenya in as far as your contribution is concerned?
Kenya is a vibrant, democratic, developmental state. I served in South Africa before, and that term developmental state was also used by current President Jacob Zuma. It reflects the fact that there are still a number of elements that can mature further. It also reflects the fact that Kenya, as a vibrant democracy, has characteristics that we in the European Union can learn from. So what I would like to see is increasingly acceptance of the notion that we are equal partners. We're talking with Kenya, we're not talking to Kenya. It's quite an important distinction. Among those, the electoral democracy displayed, particularly on March the 4th, possible issues around afterwards, but then those are still being discussed and we are looking at them. We were very much present here with the election observation mission. But it is the overall partnership that matters, and where we have a lot to talk about together. I recall last Saturday President Kenyatta's presence in Arusha at the East African Community Summit. We are very much favoring regional integration, favoring closer integration, both EAC and trilateral, including COMESA and SADC, favoring the removal, as he mentioned, of non-tariff barriers. We've gone through these processes ourselves. That's not to say that our experience should be copied or that we should impose this is how we did it. No, it is to say that we can possibly make a useful contribution, properly adapted to the vision that Kenya has elaborated for itself. And our whole development cooperation is based not on our own drafting of some country strategy, as we did it in the past. It is based on Kenya's Vision 2030, which, as you know, is a living and ongoing process.
And do you think that non-tariff barriers and achieving an East African common market is actually possible for East Africa, that it will come to a point where we have one currency for the entire region and that it will work out for East Africa? We're talking about Africa.
Yes, it's eminently possible. I would wait with the currency for a while. But I do believe that in terms of creating a truly common East African community market, the time is right, and it makes a lot of sense. Obviously there are issues about, respective competitiveness in different branches of industry or the service industries, but those can be worked out. And there's a huge market out there. And frankly, I'm often surprised to see how little inter-regional trade there is. And we're happy to see much more fierce competition locally.
Now let's talk about the fact that today is World Press Freedom Day, and we are looking at the life and the career and professionalism of journalists in Kenya as well as East Africa. When it comes to the European Union, how would you gauge the professionalism as well as the government as well supporting journalism in Kenya and the East African region?
Kenya has made huge strides in the last decennium in particular. And I think that one of the things that all of us outside diplomats looking from the outside in agree on is that Kenya enjoys pretty free media. And that goes to the credit of hundreds of dedicated journalists and editors, etc.
Do you think that there have been areas where you think maybe the media is being gagged by the government? And if any, how do you think this can be dealt with?
You know, there is a media council, there are bodies in place. You can always argue that these bodies could possibly be reinforced. I do not see many examples, or have not seen in the past, 26, 27 months, strong examples of gagging of journalists. There have been some pressures, and you will often see some pressures, but I find, you know, cartoonists, they can be vicious. And you have some very outstanding cartoonists here. And it's not always easy when you're a politician or otherwise out there on a public platform to deal with that. And I think that, frankly, Kenya's politicians and Kenya's political leadership, they have displayed maturity in the way in which they have dealt with the media.
Okay, and looking at the freedom of speech, freedom of expression in the print as well as the electronic media, do you think that to one extent the journalists in Kenya are satisfying the audiences, or you think in a way the job that journalists are doing is not exactly satisfactory?
No, I think that journalists are doing an admirable job. I think the printed media are overwhelming. That's not a negative statement. It is simply that there's a lot of material you read through, some of it not directly, you know, relevant to one's own wish to digest news, but it is quite important. And you know that far better than I do, a complex series of communities, and therefore for the media, the written media too, to satisfy different audiences in different parts of Kenya, you need to touch these various areas in a meaningful way. I do want to add one point, and that is I think that we need to do more to safeguard the safety of individual journalists. And I'm not necessarily talking about Kenya here. But there are too many countries, also in Africa, also elsewhere, where journalists are subjected to threats, to pressure, to doing something one way and not another way. And I think it's quite important on a day like today, International Press Freedom Day, that we realize that, and that we realize the risk. If you look only at the number of cameramen killed in the course of duty this year, last year, that has to stop.
Well, when you say that has to stop, there's been issues of intimidation, issues of threats where journalists, not only in Kenya, in Somalia, in Uganda, in Eritrea, and all these African countries have been threatened, have been intimidated, and for reasons they actually think that they're going to let out certain issues that might not exactly augur well with the governments of these specific countries. But how exactly does the European Union per se contribute to making sure that journalists are not intimidated, journalists are not threatened, journalists are not killed?
In a number of ways. One, we would raise specific cases directly with government authorities. Our main interlocutor is obviously the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Secondly, we will report back to our own capitals. We are, for example, in the process of upgrading our human rights strategy with respect to Kenya, which is essentially an inventory of the various aspects that we look at in terms of human rights. I can tell you Kenya is doing reasonably well. There remain areas of concern, That human rights strategy is then discussed by member states in Brussels and the EU institutions. We will then come back to Kenya and ask for an audience to relate our concerns and recommendations.
And I'll now take
It's a bit of a bureaucratic answer, but it is a whole process that is actually taken quite seriously.
Right. It's good you realize it's a bureaucratic answer. But well, let me just get back to the fact that we have social media in Kenya, across the world, and it is growing by the second. We have all these social media platforms that are coming up, and of course at EU in Kenya is the latest Twitter handle that we are officially launching today, the 3rd of May 2013, which is also World Press Freedom Day. Now let's just talk about the role of social media in public diplomacy, and how are you going to use at EU in Kenya to spread out diplomacy or public diplomacy?
We'd like it to use it to enhance the understanding of what the European Union is doing. And that may therefore mean reporting on something that our High Representative, Foreign Minister, if you want, Catherine Ashton is doing, be it, for example, in negotiations with Iran on our preoccupation that Iran might be developing highly enriched plutonium. It may mean that we are keen to engage further with the government in a particular field. So it's really to broaden the understanding of the many different fields in which we are engaged. And that's why we also want to take on board our colleagues who are dealing with Somalia, our colleagues who are dealing with humanitarian assistance, Red Cross assistance that we fund in the Tana River Delta, for example, or our colleagues sitting on a frigate on the Indian Ocean and trying to successfully, also thanks to the Kenyan Defence Forces being in southern Somalia, deter further acts of piracy.
And what should Kenyans expect in terms of, because we know that on social media we definitely have the younger youthful people who are subscribed online. So in terms of the contribution of the European Union here, are we going to see more programs that you're putting out there on social media that are specifically targeting the younger people, knowing that the bigger population that is on Twitter per se is actually people between the ages of maybe 20 and 40 or 45?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's no question that we would like to target the younger generation, because particularly here in Kenya, like in other African countries, the younger generation is quite large, quite vibrant, and we want also that generation to interact with the younger generation in Europe. I will undergo a cure of rejuvenation to try to stay with it and to understand, to continue to understand what's going on. But I think it is quite important, because that's our future, and the youth therefore needs to be on board and
Okay. Well, we are in 2013, and as I get to the end of my so many questions, I would like to know what exactly the European Union has in plan for Kenya's and as well as the East African region, say in 2013 and the next few years to come.
We're working hard with colleagues in Brussels, and that means both the External Action Service and the European Commission and the European Parliament, on how we can best assist Kenya in its priorities, in its development priorities. And that relates therefore to areas which I've heard the Honourable Deputy President speak about: agriculture, tourism. Most of those tourists come from the European Union. Agriculture, we've been supporting agriculture for many, many years. Drought resilience, post-disaster needs assessments have been done together with our colleagues from the World Bank, and we are working hard, and we are going to spend serious money on these fields in agreement with the Kenyan government authorities obviously. We would further like to assist with governance, meaning essentially threefold: the implementation of the Constitution, the continuation of the reform agenda, support to devolution, again, in agreement with the government, support to the justice sector, not only the judiciary, the justice sector more broadly, and support to making sure that the next elections are going to be yet better.
And well, we've seen that the fact that you supported the 2013 elections as well in regard to contributing and supporting the IEBC, that is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. And in this case, we'd actually want to know, how do you perceive the future of Kenya in terms of independence of these various institutions that are key to the country's development?
We perceive Kenya's future as very promising and pretty rosy. We realize fully that we have gone through 4 to 5 years of an economic and financial crisis. While we in crisis, we should also understand how much has been done to take Europe and the European Union member states out of that crisis. And that again implies many young and unemployed people. We cannot afford a future where too many young people are unemployed. Again, that is something that has been mentioned also by Honourable President Kenyatta in his speech at the occasion of the opening of Parliament, for example. We are keen to continue that support. There's one element I wanted to add that I have not yet mentioned, and that is aid to infrastructure. We have so far assisted with the construction over the past decennia of 2,000 kilometers of roads. We are very keen, and I mentioned it to Governor Evans Kidero last Monday, to continue to work on that, particularly focusing, and this is still under discussion in Brussels, so the final word on that has not yet been said, on urban transport and mobility around Nairobi. We are going to be working on 15 odd missing links, some 30 million euros worth of projects that will be starting up at the end of 2013. They're in the works now, but physical construction will start later this year. But we are really looking at a fairly important project where we will use some of our grant money and also some of the loans from our colleagues, notably from the European Investment Bank and others, who are also based here, as you know, so that we can blend grant and loans in terms of further construction. A lot of that construction would focus on decongesting urban areas, starting with Nairobi. Some of it will play into the LAPSET Lamu corridor priorities, such as a motorway coming from Juba, South Sudan, to the northeast, direction Eldoret, if you want.
Oh, interesting. And when it comes to technology, has the European Union contributed to the development of technology in Kenya?
Good question. We have certainly tried to help, but Kenya doesn't need all that much help when it comes to technology, particularly ICT. I increasingly believe that we should, except for the big infrastructure projects, move into sharing expertise. So there will be areas where technology, be it port management, and I'm critical of the management of Mombasa port, and that also is, it's holding us back a bit when it comes to the Lamu port. So those are areas where specific technology that has been developed in cooperation with port authorities elsewhere, in cooperation with the private sector. Let's not forget one single fact. Trade will help Kenya more than aid. So while I put a lot of emphasis on what we've done in terms of aid, at the end of the day, it is trade and the growth in trade that will be most promising. And there's a huge, huge potential for further growth and development there.